You killed him. Those were the first words my mother said to me as the police pulled my hands behind my back and snapped the cold steel cuffs around my wrists. Her voice cut through the chaos louder than the sirens, sharper than the wailing neighbors, stronger than my own sobs. My mother, the woman who gave me life, pointed at me as though I were nothing but a monster, her eyes blazing with fury. And in that moment my world ended. My brother Michael was lying in the living room, his shirt soaked in blood, his eyes wide open in a frozen stare. He had been everything to me. My protector, my partner in laughter, the one who always shielded me from Mom's sharp tongue. Now let's digress a little. Don't forget to subscribe, like this story, and tell us where you're watching from. That night we were supposed to have a family dinner. Just the three of us. But what began as an ordinary evening ended with flashing lights, a body bag, and my life in ruins. I remember screaming until my throat tore. I begged them to listen, to believe me. I didn't do this. I loved him. He was my brother. But my mother didn't waver. She clutched her robe tightly around her thin shoulders, eyes red but dry. She did it, she told the officers. She was jealous. She fought with him earlier. I heard it. I knew something like this would happen. Her words sealed my fate. The trial was a blur. The prosecutor painted me as an angry, unstable girl who snapped after years of sibling rivalry. They said I had motive, jealousy, resentment, desperation. And when they asked my mother to testify, she did. Calmly, coldly. She told the court that I had always resented Michael. That I had a temper. That I screamed I wished he were gone. Every word she spoke was a knife. I sat there, shackled and numb, staring at the woman I once called Mom, wondering if she could see how easily she was destroying me. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. Second-degree murder. 4 years in prison. I was 19 years old. Prison is where time stands still, yet eats you alive. Every day I woke up to the same gray walls, the same rattling keys, the same heavy silence filled with regret. I replayed that night over and over until the memory became a prison of its own. But the worst prison was not the cell. It was knowing my own mother put me there. She didn't visit. Not once. No letters, no calls. It was as though I had died alongside my brother and she had buried me with him. At first, I cried myself to sleep every night. But tears only last so long. Soon something else replaced them. Something harder. Sharper. A vow. I would not die here. I would not let her win. One afternoon, while cleaning in the prison library, I stumbled upon a stack of dusty law books. Criminal codes. Case studies. Trial transcripts. At first, I flipped through them to distract myself. But then something caught my eye. It was a case, so eerily similar to mine. A mother's testimony had been the deciding factor. Years later, new evidence overturned the conviction. I sat there, my heart pounding, realizing that words alone, lies, could destroy a life. And maybe, just maybe, truth could save one. That's when the spark lit. I began reading every book I could get my hands on. Law became my oxygen. I studied criminal defense, evidence rules, wrongful convictions. I memorized statutes like they were scriptures. Day after day, year after year, I built myself from the inside out. By the time I was released, I wasn't the same broken girl who walked in. I was steel. When the gates finally opened and I stepped into the sunlight, the world felt both familiar and alien. The air was fresher, but the scars ran deep. And waiting for me, leaning against a car with her arms folded, was my mother. She hadn't aged a day in my eyes. The same sharp cheekbones, the same calculating eyes. "You've served your time," she said flatly, as though I'd been away at boarding school instead of rotting in a cell. "Let's put this behind us." Put it behind us? Her son was dead. I had been caged. And she wanted to act as though it were just history? But I stayed quiet. Because I had learned something in those 4 years. Revenge doesn't come from screaming. Revenge comes from silence, from patience, from waiting until your enemy thinks they've won. What she didn't know was that prison hadn't broken me. It had armed me. And one day soon I would use everything I'd learned to tear her lies apart. Because the truth was out there, buried under layers of deceit. And when I found it, I would make her pay. Not just as a mother, but as an accomplice. Prison was supposed to crush me. And for a time it did. The first months felt like drowning in concrete. Every clang of the cell door was a reminder of the freedom I'd lost. Every whisper from the other inmates was a reminder that I didn't belong here, that I was serving time for a crime I didn't commit. But the worst part wasn't the noise. It was the silence. At night, lying on a thin mattress under a flickering light, I replayed my mother's words over and over. She did it. 4 syllables and my life was gone. I would wake up trembling, sometimes screaming, clutching my chest as if I could claw the truth out of myself and hold it in the air for the world to see. But there was no one to show. No one who cared. My brother was dead. My family was gone. My so-called friends disappeared after the trial. I was an orphan with a living mother. A woman who had killed me without lifting a single weapon. In the beginning I thought of ending it all. There was a night when I sat by the barred window staring at the moon, wondering if it would be easier to just stop fighting. I imagined my brother's voice telling me to hold on, but it felt distant, fading. And then something happened. A guard, careless and bored, dropped a stack of books on the floor while passing the library cart. One of them slid under my cell door. It was thick with a cracked spine and faded gold letters. Criminal Law and Procedure. I picked it up out of sheer desperation for distraction. But as I flipped through the pages, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. It began with curiosity. Why had my lawyer failed to defend me? Why had the jury believed my mother so easily? Why did the prosecution's case sound so convincing when it was built on lies? The answers were in those pages. I learned about hearsay, about evidentiary rules, about cross-examination strategies. I read late into the night, tracing lines with my finger until the words blurred and my head ached. Soon 1 book became 2. 2 became 10. I begged for more, volunteered for every library duty, traded cigarettes for old casebooks. The inmates laughed at me. "Hey law girl," they'd say. "Defending yourself against laundry duty?" I ignored them. Because while they wasted time counting days, I was building something stronger than walls. I was building a weapon. By the 2nd year I could recite sections of the criminal code from memory. I studied wrongful conviction cases, fascinated by how easily juries were swayed by emotion and false testimony. And then one day I found it. Buried in a dusty legal digest was a case eerily similar to mine. A sibling accused of killing another, convicted largely because of the parent's testimony. Years later, new evidence proved the parent was actually complicit, and the conviction was overturned. My hands shook as I read it. This wasn't just theory anymore. This was proof. If it could happen to someone else, it could happen to me. And if parents could lie to save themselves, what did that mean about my mother? The thought haunted me. For years I had believed my mother was cold, cruel, even unloving, but still innocent in Michael's death. She had let me take the fall because I was convenient. But the more I studied, the more I realized something darker. She hadn't just blamed me. She had orchestrated it. I remembered details from that night that I had tried to bury. How calm she was when the police arrived. How quickly she recited a timeline that excluded herself. How she kept repeating that I had argued with Michael as though rehearsing it. And then I thought about the insurance money Michael had. He had recently updated his policy, naming Mom as the beneficiary. The dots were connecting themselves. And I swore then that I would connect every last one. By my 3rd year I wasn't just a prisoner. I was a scholar. Other inmates began coming to me for help with their appeals, their parole hearings, even their divorce filings. They called me counselor. Guards smirked, but some of them even slipped me extra notebooks, curious to see what I was building. Every case I studied, every argument I dissected sharpened my mind like a blade. But deep down it wasn't just about knowledge. It was about survival. Every statute I memorized was another brick in the wall between me and despair. Every precedent I underlined was another nail in the coffin I was building for my mother's lies. Because when I got out, and I knew I would, I wasn't coming back to her as her broken daughter. I was coming back as her reckoning. The 4th year was the longest. By then I had accepted that my release was inevitable. But freedom without justice was another kind of prison. I knew I couldn't just walk out and try to rebuild my life while the truth stayed buried. I began drafting motions I couldn't yet file, gathering every scrap of memory into a legal framework. I interviewed fellow inmates about corruption, about cover-ups, about manipulations in trials. And one late night, in the dim glow of a single flickering bulb, I wrote down my first plan of attack. Reconstruct the night of Michael's murder. Dig into Mom's finances. Trace every lie she told in court. Find proof, hard proof, that she was involved. Use the law she relied on to destroy me. To destroy her instead. When I finished, I folded the paper neatly and hid it inside the binding of my first law book. It was no longer just a dream. It was a roadmap. And then one morning the gates opened. The guard handed me my release papers with a smirk. "Law girl, you're out. Try not to come back." I stepped into the sunlight, my heart hammering. The world was the same, yet everything inside me was different. And waiting for me at the curb was the woman who put me here. My mother, arms crossed, lips tight, eyes sharp. "You've served your time," she said flatly. "Let's put this behind us." I smiled, but not the way I used to. This smile was thin, cold, patient. Because what she didn't know, what she would never see coming, was that I had spent 4 years preparing for this moment. She thought she had buried me. But I had risen. And now I was coming for her. Freedom is supposed to taste sweet. But the first breath of air I took outside those prison gates was bitter. The sun shone too brightly, the wind cut too sharply, and every sound felt foreign, as though I had been reborn into a world that no longer wanted me. 4 years isn't a lifetime, but it was long enough for everything to shift. Neighborhoods to change, friends to vanish, and technology to race ahead without me. Yet the strangest change wasn't in the world. It was in me. I was no longer the frightened 19-year-old girl who had begged for her mother's love. I had shed her in that cell, piece by piece, until only something harder remained. And when I saw my mother leaning against her car, arms folded as though waiting for a late appointment, I knew that the time for weakness was gone. "Get in," she said simply. I did. But as I sat beside her, I realized something. I wasn't her daughter anymore. I was her shadow, her enemy, and one day her judge. She drove in silence for most of the ride, her knuckles tight on the steering wheel. I studied her profile, the same sharp cheekbones, the same hard mouth. She looked untouched by time, as though she hadn't spent a single sleepless night over her son's death or her daughter's imprisonment. Finally she spoke. "You'll stay at the house until you figure things out. Don't expect much. I've gotten used to being alone." Alone. The word landed heavy. Not widowed, not mother grieving a son, not woman who sacrificed for justice. Just alone. As if my existence had been erased from her life. I nodded, silent, letting her believe I was docile. But in my chest something burned. I wasn't here to live under her roof or follow her rules. I was here to gather evidence, to peel back every layer of her lies until she stood exposed. The house hadn't changed much. Michael's room was locked. A shrine, perhaps, or a crime scene she didn't want disturbed. My room had been stripped bare, as though she couldn't stand a trace of me. She set a plate of food on the table that first night, then vanished upstairs. No welcome home. No apology. Just cold civility. But I didn't need warmth anymore. I needed access. And I got it. Every morning she left for her part-time job at the community office. Every afternoon she returned like clockwork. That gave me hours each day to search. At first I started small. Drawers, cabinets, mail. But what I discovered wasn't small at all. Hidden at the back of her desk was a folder of insurance documents. My brother's name was on the top sheet. The payout after his death had been substantial. More than enough to pay off debts, remodel the house, and live comfortably. The beneficiary? My mother. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. She had claimed the money only weeks after my conviction. I remembered the whispers in court about motive. They had pinned it on me, jealousy, rage. But here it was in black and white. The money had gone straight into her pocket. And suddenly I saw it clearly. Michael hadn't just been a son. He had been a ticket. A sacrifice. And I had been the scapegoat. The next step was harder. I needed proof beyond suspicion. Insurance alone wasn't enough. I needed timelines, connections, lies I could unravel with precision. That's when I began visiting the library downtown. To anyone else, I was just a woman starting over, burying herself in books. But in reality, I was pulling court transcripts, reviewing trial records, combing through archived police notes. And the more I read, the angrier I became. The inconsistencies leapt off the page. My mother claimed she was in the kitchen when she heard Michael and me arguing. But the neighbor reported seeing her leave the house half an hour before the police were called. She testified that I had a violent temper, yet there were no records, no witnesses to support it, except her. And most damning of all, she never once cried on the stand. Not for Michael. Not for me. It was all performance. Calculated. One afternoon, while reviewing the transcript for the 100th time, I noticed something strange. A name buried in the witness list. Detective Harold Kinsey. He hadn't testified at length, just confirmed evidence handling. But something about his brief statement gnawed at me. So I looked him up. Retired now, living 2 towns over. I drove out there, heart pounding. When he opened the door, his hair was gray, his back bent, but his eyes were sharp. "You're her," he said quietly. "The girl who went away for killing her brother." I swallowed hard. "The girl who was framed," I corrected. He hesitated, then motioned me inside. Over stale coffee, he confessed what he hadn't dared say in court. There were things that didn't add up. Blood spatter patterns. The timing of the 911 call. I flagged it in my notes, but the higher-ups told me to drop it. Said the case was airtight with your mother's testimony. Said the jury wouldn't buy anything else. My chest tightened. "Do you still have those notes?" He nodded slowly. "In storage. But listen to me, girl. If you go digging, you won't just stir up dust. You'll stir up a storm." I met his eyes, steady. "Good. That's exactly what I want." That night I returned home, my mother asleep upstairs, the house silent. I stood in the hallway staring at her closed door, my fists clenched. For 4 years she had let me rot in prison while she lived off my brother's death. For 4 years she had smiled at neighbors, worn her widow's mask, and pretended to be a grieving mother. But now I had the first crack in her armor. A retired detective's forgotten notes. Insurance money that smelled of blood. A timeline that didn't hold. And behind all of it, a woman who thought she had beaten me. She had no idea that the daughter she buried in prison was long gone. In her place stood something far more dangerous. Her prosecutor. Her executioner. Her reckoning. Detective Harold Kinsey wasn't a man who liked revisiting ghosts. That much was clear from the way his hand trembled when he unlocked the dusty storage unit at the edge of town. The air smelled of mildew and forgotten years. Stacked boxes leaning like crooked tombstones. He shuffled forward, muttering to himself before pulling out a crate marked, "Briggs, Case 214. My heart stopped. This was my brother's case file. "This should have gone back to evidence archives," he said, voice low. But I couldn't let it. Something never sat right. I told myself maybe one day someone would need it. He set the box down on a metal table, pushing it toward me as though it burned him to touch it. "Consider this my penance," he whispered. Inside I found fragments of my past, each one sharper than glass. Photographs of Michael's body, transcripts with my name scrawled across the top, witness reports yellowed by time. And then buried under it all, a notebook, small, leather-bound, edges fraying. Kinsey's notes. I flipped it open, scanning hastily written lines. Blood pattern inconsistent with fight. Window unlocked from outside. 911 call delayed nearly 20 minutes after estimated time of death. Weather calm. Too calm. I froze. Too calm. That phrase leapt out at me like a blade. Because I remembered it too. I remembered looking at her face that night. Not pale with grief, not trembling with shock, but steady. Steady like someone watching a performance she had written herself. My chest tightened. And then, on the last page, I saw the words that changed everything. Anonymous call placed 2 hours before police arrived. Caller female. Voice matches mother. I stared at the sentence, unable to breathe. 2 hours before? She had called someone before the police? Who? Why? Kinsey leaned forward, his eyes sharp despite age. That note was why I got pulled. My captain told me it was irrelevant, said I was stretching. But I knew. That call wasn't just a mistake. It meant she knew Michael was dead before she ever dialed 911. The room spun around me. My stomach turned to stone. She hadn't just framed me. She had known. She had planned. When I left the storage unit, notebook clutched to my chest, I felt like I was carrying dynamite. This was no longer suspicion. This was evidence. But it wasn't enough yet. Evidence without context was just paper. I needed the who on the other end of that call. I needed the motive, the reason she would sacrifice one child and damn the other. So I dug deeper. The next week I combed through old phone records, borrowing every contact I had from prison who still owed me favors. One came through, a woman whose cousin worked at the phone company. A risk, yes. Illegal, maybe. But I wasn't afraid of lines anymore. My mother had crossed everyone. And when the records came back, my blood ran cold. The number she had dialed belonged to a man named William Hart. I didn't recognize it at first. But when I searched the name, my breath caught. Hart was an attorney. Not just any attorney. One who specialized in estate planning and insurance law. My pulse hammered. She hadn't called for help. She hadn't called in panic. She had called her lawyer. Hours before the police knew Michael was dead. Which meant one thing. She had planned his death, planned my conviction, and planned her payout down to the last breath. That night I returned home late. She was sitting at the kitchen table sipping tea, pretending to be the picture of normalcy. "Where were you?" she asked without looking up. "Library," I answered smoothly, sliding the notebook deeper into my bag. She hummed, unconvinced, her eyes flicking up to me with something sharper than curiosity. For the first time, I wondered if she sensed the cracks forming in her carefully built wall. But I forced a smile. Just catching up on everything I missed. She smirked faintly. "You'll never catch up." Maybe not, I thought. But I would overtake. The next day I returned to Kinsey with the phone record. His eyes widened as he read. Her lawyer. Before the police. He whistled low. "That's damning." "It's proof," I said fiercely. "She didn't just lie. She orchestrated it. Michael's death, my imprisonment, all of it." Kinsey leaned back, studying me. "You've built yourself a case. But cases need timing. You can't just march into court and accuse her. You need the right moment. The right stage." His words lingered. And then it hit me. The wedding. In weeks I would stand in front of friends, colleagues, maybe even officials. My mother would be there, preening in her mask of respectability. What better moment to rip it away? Not in silence. Not in secret. But in front of everyone she ever lied to. The plan began to take shape. I made copies of every note, every document, every record. I built a binder thicker than my prison case file, filled with evidence that screamed the truth. But I didn't stop there. I tracked Hart, the lawyer she had called. His office was still open, his name still gleaming in gold letters. One visit was enough to see the fear flicker in his eyes when I introduced myself. He remembered that call. He remembered my mother's voice. And though he tried to brush me off, I left him with a warning. "One day soon you'll be under oath. Think carefully about which lies you want carved into stone." He paled. Which meant I had him. By the time I returned home, my mother was waiting in the living room, her tea untouched. "You've been busy," she said softly, her tone deceptively gentle. I froze. "What do you mean?" Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I know that look in your eyes. The same one I had when I decided you weren't strong enough to survive on your own. You've changed. You think you're smarter now. Dangerous, even." Her gaze cut through me, sharp as broken glass. "Be careful, darling. You might not like what you find." I forced myself to meet her stare. "Neither will you." For a long moment the room was silent, the air thick with unspoken war. Then she rose, smoothed her dress, and went upstairs without another word. But I knew she knew. And she knew I knew. The battle lines were drawn. That night as I lay awake, the notebook open beside me, I whispered to the darkness. "You buried me once, Mother. But this time I'm the one with the shovel." And for the first time in years I felt something I hadn't dared feel. Triumph. The church bells tolled like a countdown. For every guest seated in polished rows, for every bouquet of flowers pinned perfectly to the pews, today was a celebration of love. For me it was also the stage of my revenge. My dress flowed around me like armor, white satin laced with defiance. The veil that brushed my shoulders wasn't for innocence, it was for disguise. Beneath it my eyes burned with purpose. I had spent weeks preparing for this day, not just as a bride but as a prosecutor. My binder of evidence, meticulously copied, sat in the hands of a trusted ally, my maid of honor, Sophie. She was the only one who knew the full truth, the only one I trusted not to break. And across the aisle in the second row sat my mother. Her smile was painted on, her pearls gleaming, her hands folded like she was the queen of the occasion. Anyone else might have mistaken her for a proud parent. But I saw through it. I saw the chill in her eyes, the smugness in her lips. She thought she still held me under her thumb. Not today. The ceremony began with practiced words. Vows exchanged, rings presented, promises sealed in front of God and witnesses. My fiancé's hand was steady in mine, his eyes soft, unaware of the war raging behind my calm face. But my moment wasn't at the altar. It was after. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, applause thundered through the room. I smiled, kissed my husband, and let the joy swell for a brief, stolen second. Then came the reception. That was where I had chosen to strike. The hall was lit with golden chandeliers, laughter bubbling like champagne. Guests mingled, clinking glasses, plates clattering. Speeches began, the best man with jokes, Sophie with tenderness. And then it was my turn. I rose slowly, microphone in hand, my heart a drumbeat of thunder. I know tradition calls for a bride to thank her family, I began, my voice steady, carrying through the room. To honor the people who raised her, who shaped her life. But today I'm going to do something different. I'm going to tell you a story. Chairs shifted. Curious faces turned toward me. My mother's smile faltered by a fraction. I pressed on. 4 years ago I was sentenced to prison for the murder of my brother. Many of you remember the headlines. You remember the shame. You remember how easily the world believed I was guilty. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My husband's brow furrowed, confusion flashing across his face. I continued, unwavering. But what you don't know is what happened behind the curtain. You don't know that the very woman who should have defended me, who should have fought for me, was the one who stood against me. You don't know that she painted me as a monster while she played the grieving mother. Gasps echoed. My mother's face tightened, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair. And you certainly don't know this. That days before the police even arrived, she called her lawyer. Not the police. Not an ambulance. Her lawyer. I lifted my hand. Sophie moved forward, placing the binder into my palm. I opened it, flipping to the copied phone records, holding them high for all to see. This is the proof. Her call logs. Her insurance papers. Her lies. The room erupted, whispers, gasps, shock ricocheting like gunfire. I looked directly at her. She blamed me to save herself. She let me rot in prison while she cashed in on my brother's death. But I am not the girl she buried. I am the woman who has clawed her way back, and today in front of all of you I am taking back my name. The silence that followed was heavier than any cell I had known. Then came the crack. My mother stood, her mask shattering in her fury. You ungrateful little. Don't, I snapped, my voice slicing through hers. Don't you dare spin another lie. Not here. Not now. I stepped closer, microphone still in hand, binder open. Detective Kinsey kept his notes. Do you remember him? He wrote down what the jury never saw. That the blood patterns didn't match. That the timeline was false. That you were too calm, too prepared. And now we all know why. Her lips trembled. For the first time in my life I saw fear in her eyes. Michael didn't have to die, I whispered. But you let him. And then you sacrificed me too. The hall was electric, guests frozen between disbelief and horror. Some turned toward her with narrowed eyes, others whispering furiously. My husband reached for my hand not to stop me but to steady me. And then Sophie did the final stroke. She walked to the projector, slid in the USB I had given her and pressed play. On the screen, a recording played, William Hart's shaky voice from my meeting with him. Yes, she called me before the police. Said she needed advice. Said something terrible had happened, but she didn't sound shocked. She sounded ready. The hall erupted again. My mother crumbled back into her seat, pale, silent, her mask destroyed. I leaned toward the microphone one last time. I don't need revenge anymore. I have the truth. And that is stronger than any lie you ever told. I set the microphone down, turned and walked off the stage. My husband's hand entwined with mine, Sophie at my side. Behind me chaos swirled, but I didn't look back. For the first time in 4 years I was free. Truly free. And my mother? She was exactly where she belonged. Trapped in the cage she had built with her own lies. The morning after my wedding should have been spent in bliss, tangled in soft sheets with my new husband. Instead it began with the sound of fists pounding on my mother's front door. Blue and red lights painted her porch, sirens humming in the background. Neighbors peeked from their blinds as officers in dark uniforms marched up her steps. And when she finally opened the door, her hair disheveled, eyes hollow from a sleepless night, they read her the words I had once heard myself. You are under arrest. The irony was thick enough to choke on. She tried to protest, of course. I'm the victim here. My daughter is lying. She's jealous, she's vindictive. But this time no one believed her. Because I had given them the evidence. The notebook, the call logs, the lawyer's reluctant testimony. It was more than enough to reopen Michael's case. And now, the world was finally seeing her the way I had always known her to be. The trial that followed was grueling, but I sat through every moment. I watched her face as prosecutors outlined the insurance policies she had quietly collected, the debt she had been drowning in, the motive that had driven her to see Michael not as a son, but as a payday. I listened as William Hart, pale and sweating, admitted on the stand that she had phoned him hours before the police. Cool, composed, calculating. I saw Detective Kinsey's notes projected onto the screen for the jury, the words "too calm" circled in red like a brand. And through it all I never flinched. Because for the first time I wasn't the accused. I wasn't the broken daughter on trial. I was the witness. The survivor. The woman who had clawed her way out of a cell and forced the truth into the light. The verdict came on a gray afternoon. The foreman stood, voice steady. "We find the defendant guilty." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, cameras flashing. I looked at her. My mother, my betrayer, my jailer. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stared at me, lips pressed into a thin line, as though she couldn't comprehend how her empire of lies had finally crumbled. And then the bailiff led her away. Just like that. Afterward, I stood on the courthouse steps, microphones thrust in my face, reporters shouting questions. "How does it feel to see your mother convicted? Do you think justice was served? What will you do now?" I gave them only one answer. I was blamed for a crime I didn't commit. I lost 4 years of my life. But today I got them back. This isn't just justice for me. It's justice for Michael. Then I walked away hand in hand with my husband, ignoring the chaos behind me. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without nightmares. Michael's face still lingered in my dreams, but softer now, not twisted with blood and grief. He smiled. He seemed at peace. And maybe at last I could be too. People often ask me why I didn't let it go. Why I didn't just move on, marry, and bury the past. The answer is simple. Because silence is what buried me the first time. Because lies thrive in the dark. Because sometimes, the only way to heal is to pull the poison into the light and watch it burn. And so I did. My mother spent years studying the law, but in the end, it was me who mastered it. It was me who used it against her. She thought prison would break me. Instead, it forged me into someone she could never control again. As I write this now, sitting in the quiet of my own home, my wedding ring glinting in the lamplight, I feel something I never thought I would. Freedom. Not just from her, not just from the bars of a cell, but from the weight of blame I carried for so long. The truth set me free. And my revenge? My revenge was simply making sure everyone saw it. Because in the end, justice wasn't just her conviction. It was me standing tall, unbroken, and finally, at peace.